Today's conversation is with Dr. Katie Collins, molluscan palaeobiologist and curator of fossil benthic mollusks at the Natural History Museum in London. This episode is a part of our series on the ocean's natural cleaning crew, marine organisms that filter water, recycle nutrients, and help keep ecosystems functioning, much like Healthy Seas volunteers do through their cleanup work. Together, we'll explore the world of bivalves, oysters, mussels, clams, scallops, and many other animals that are far more surprising than they may seem. Bivalves are living pumps, capable of filtering huge amounts of water, removing suspended particles, improving water quality, reducing excess nutrients, and creating habitat for other marine life. We'll also talk about what ancient bivalves can tell us about past climate change, why restored oyster reefs matter, and how bivalves interact with microplastics and pollution. So let's dive into the hidden power of these two-shelled ocean cleaners. Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for joining me on the Healthy Seas podcast. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be here.
So you do some really interesting work with bivalves. So let's go straight to that. What are bivalves even?
So bivalves they're a group, we would say a class within the phylum Mollusca. So mollusks are clams and snails and limpets and octopus and squid, that kind of thing. So bivalves are specifically the ones that have no head and they just have two shells that fit together like a clam shell. So they are your clams and your cockles and scallops and mussels and oysters. Each of which of those, by the way, is like a huge group in its own right. There's hundreds of kinds of scallop and hundreds of kinds of oyster and mussel. So there are about 6,500 living species of bivalve, give or take, and there are maybe another 10,000 or so extinct ones, and they have been around for over 500 million years.
Wow. Okay. And they're also described as natural water filters. So what does that mean?
That is,
in practice?
It's a really good summary of their feeding strategy. So bivalves are highly specialized to just be a set of gills almost. Everything about their body is optimized really to maximize the function of their filtering gills. Some bivalves are carnivores and some of them are deposit feeders. They eat gunge that's on top of the seafloor. And some of them have symbioses with bacteria and algae so that they can eat sulfur and light, sunlight. But most bivalves are suspension feeders. So they pull in water and they take out the particulate matter in that water, which contains their food, and that's what they eat. And so they are possibly the most specialized filter feeders in the world, as far as I'm aware. They are so optimized to just be gills. They've jettisoned almost every other part of their body or made it really small just to maximize the amount of space that can be gill.
Huh.
Yeah.
And the way you were describing the different places that they can find their food, are they mobile? Because when I think of a clam, for example, I think of it fixed in one spot for the most part.
So, yes, they can be. Some of them are fixed down. So oysters cement themselves to rocks. So they really are fixed down. They effectively concrete themselves onto rocks and then they're stuck forever. Some scallops and mussels attach themselves using a proteinaceous material called a byssal thread. And some mussels can actually, they can cut that and wobble over somewhere else and then attach themselves again. But some bivalves are highly mobile. Many of them, like most of them, are actually shallow or deep burrowers in sediment. And so some of them like to burrow very deeply and then they just stay there. If they are unfortunate and they get dug up, but they manage to escape whatever dug them up, then they can rebury themselves. Some of them are not good at it. And you feel very bad for them if they get dug up. They're desperately trying to wedge themselves back into the sand, but it's quite difficult to bury in sand. And as adults, they're optimized to anchor, not to dig anymore. So when they're trying to get back into the sand, it's not going well for them. But some of them are incredibly fast burrowers. There is a kind that lives in New Zealand called Toaroa, which can dig faster than a man with a shovel can.
Hmm.
And they're endangered now, but mostly because they're such good burrowers that they have a very long generation time because they didn't need to have millions and millions of babies. And they're tasty. So people were basically
Mm.
digging them up. And anyway, they're protected now, but they are very fast. But some scallops can swim. They can
Okay.
swim very
All right.
fast.
So none are necessarily walking across
No,
the ocean
they
floor.
are
Okay.
all marine or freshwater, so they all live in water. They can crawl their way around if they have to. There are some very microscopic ones which are parasites and commensals with things like sea urchins and sea cucumbers and shrimp. And some of them and some of their relatives are actually very active crawlers. And you would look at them and you might think that they were a microscopic slug. They're very small and they have little tentacles and they're brightly colored and they can crawl around like a slug. Recently, the Mollusk of the Year competition ran, and one of the contenders for Mollusk of the Year was a thing called Epipodonta lunata, which is one of these very tiny, it's called a galeomatoid bivalve, and it has optimized itself so that instead of its valves closing like a normal clam, they are stuck at 180 degrees all the time, and it's circular and it glides around like that just above the
Ah.
seafloor, like a little hovercraft. It's very small, only a couple of millimeters long. Very tiny little hovercraft clam. Yeah,
That sounds very cute.
it's very cute.
Um, so back to the water
Mhm,
filtering, because they're ocean cleaners,
mhm.
much like Healthy Seas is as well. Can you walk us through this filter process step by step? What's happening inside the animal as it filters water?
Totally. So a bivalve is effectively it's a living pump. So they bring in water through their inhalant aperture or current or whatever you like to call it. And in some bivalves, that has been elongated into a sort of a fleshy snorkel called a siphon. So they bring in the water in their inhalant aperture and it goes around their body. It goes over the gills. So it comes into their mantle cavity. It goes over their gills, which we also call tinidia, if you want a fun crossword word. If you get a C and a T in Scrabble and you don't know what to do with them, you can say tinidia, which then go to these things called the labial palps, which are little grippy, sorty things, effectively. And those select which particles that are coming in the water, which ones are food and which ones are junk. And they pass the ones
Mm.
that are food to the mouth and they get rid of the junk ones. They don't want those over. So they send them back to the mantle edge where they get rolled up with other bits of junk into little globules, which we call pseudofeces. They're not feces, they don't pass through the gut, but they look like they are. They're waste product. The bivalve knows that's not food
Mm.
and it bundles it all up and chucks it overboard. And then the food parts go through the digestive system just like they do with you and me, and they come out the other end. And they and the water that came in are expelled through what we call the exhalant current. So a bivalve has an inhalant and an exhalant current. And that exhalant current also can be wrapped up in a long siphon. And the reason they want a siphon is if you can bury yourself deeper, you're safe. But if you bury yourself, you might smother and die, which is not good. So just like we can't breathe underwater without a snorkel, a bivalve can't breathe under the sediment without a siphon. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Now, it's interesting that you say they're choosing the food versus the junk, because I know that they are really good at cleaning our waters, at filtering out pollutants and whatnot. So, what are they eating? And what are they not
Yeah,
eating? What are they pushing out, pushing overboard, as you put it?
sure. Yeah. So they take in everything effectively. If it can be
Hmm.
suspended in water, then they're taking it in. So any floaters. What they want is things like algae and plankton. And so microscopic plants, microscopic animals. We have some evidence, this is not hugely well studied, but we do have some evidence that they are very picky. They, oh, I'd rather eat diatoms and I'm going to get rid of these. Like, they can be quite specific, we think, but they also take, so they take in that and they will also take in things like sediment. So the sea, if you ever go out into the sea, sometimes it's beautifully clear in some special places, but often it's murky. And a lot of it's murky with is just rock. It's just sediment. It's the stuff that comes in out of the rivers and gets recirculated around. And normally rock particles are heavy and they sink. And so one fun geological fact is that if you go from a beach offshore and say you had the ability to measure particle size as you went, you would find that it got progressively finer all the way out to sea. And that's because the heavy stuff needs energetic water to keep it entrained, to keep it in the water. And the energy happens at the beach where the waves are. So beaches are coarse sand. And then as you lose wave energy out to the deep water, you lose the ability to carry heavy particles. So you only get silt, then mud, then clay-sized particles. So bivalves take that out. They don't want to eat that. There's one bivalve that can eat rocks, but we're not going to get into that. There's a lot of them that can bore into rocks. There's one of them that passes it through its gut. That's a funky new thing that we only just learned. So the bivalve takes that in. It doesn't want to eat it, so it doesn't go into the gut. It goes into the pseudofeces. So they make little lumps of sand and they chuck those over. But other things that they will take in are any kind of bacteria. If there's bacteria adhering to stuff, then the bivalve will take that in, which sometimes doesn't bother it at all, much like we can eat things that have a bit of a bacterial coating. And if that bacteria isn't particularly good at surviving in our stomach acid, then it doesn't matter to us. That's the whole reason you have, well, one of the reasons you have stomach acid is to protect you from things like that. And the same for the bivalve. They will take in fecal matter from other animals. So if there's a farm that's got runoff going into the sea, some of that will be fertilizer and some of that will just be straight up poop. And a bivalve doesn't care or know. It doesn't understand what a cow is. It just takes it all in. And the same for things like heavy metals and other kinds of pollutants. And some of those will affect the bivalve and some of them won't. And some of them they can dump out over the side, and some of them instead they incorporate into their tissue or their shell. So you need to be careful where you pick shellfish up before you eat them.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Yeah.
Because as they're taking in these harmful substances, then can we eat them afterwards? Because I feel like there's pollution everywhere nowadays. Like, where can we find clean bivalves?
Well, in a lot of the Western world, your local government will put up signage if they believe that it's not safe to consume shellfish from an area where shellfish live, but other stuff is coming into the water. So there's that. But also a lot of the shellfish you get into the supermarket these days is commercially grown, and they have methods for dealing with this, some things they can deal with. Things that go into the gut of the bivalve can be purged by gathering your bivalves still alive and then effectively keeping them somewhere where the water is very clean for a little bit before you sell them, so that the bad stuff passes through their gut and only clean stuff remains. And they also, commercial outfits are pretty picky about where they'll put their stuff, and I imagine they would jump on people polluting their water very fast because that would be a horrible reputational risk. So yeah, it's in general, if you are purchasing the shellfish, you should be pretty safe. If you are collecting the shellfish, you should look out for local government information about water quality safety.
Now, at a measurable level, how much can bivalves improve water quality or clarity? Is that something you can quantify?
You can. So this is an area of extremely active research, and I should also caveat it by saying that this is expensive to do, and so the amount of research that we have done on it really depends on the willingness generally of the local bodies to fund it. And so a lot of the information that we have is about a very small number of species largely found in Chesapeake Bay, where this has been like a big deal of, so a lot of our information comes from that. So I will caveat what I'm about to say with, this is by no means something that we know for all bivalves or all areas of the globe. If I don't specify where I got something from, it probably means that the species in question was an oyster called Crassostrea virginica, which is very heavily studied for this. And the place that the study was done was probably Chesapeake Bay. So just as a caveat.
Yeah, I'm not far from there.
So we can directly measure how clear water is because you can literally shine light through it and see, oh, the water is this amount clear. So there's ways to do that. And bivalves absolutely improve water clarity because, as I said, they take out suspended particles. So what they're doing is taking out all that cloudiness. So as bivalves clean the water faster, and if they can clean the water faster than suspended sediment is entering the place, then the water will actively look clearer. So there are some YouTube videos you can find, again, largely put up by people who are doing work in Chesapeake Bay, of like, here is a tank of muddy water, here is another tank of muddy water that's got some oysters in it, and then you get like a time lapse and you watch the oyster tank become clearer and clearer. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I've seen those
Yeah, they're
videos.
amazing. So we can measure we can quantify the rate at which a bivalve affects water quality as its clearance rate, which is, to be technical, this is measured as the amount of water cleared of a certain number of particles in a given time, or as filtration rate, which is the amount of biomass of those particles taken out in a given time. Clearance rate is easier to measure, and so that's usually what's reported. It's also standardized to like per gram of bivalve. So, yeah, you can basically, to boil this down, yes, you can measure it. It is a measurable, knowable thing.
For the species that we know of, like how much can they filter out in a day?
So, this is stunning. Okay, so Crassostria virginica individuals can clear over 11 liters of water an hour per gram of oyster. So if
Oh,
you have
wow.
like a 10-gram oyster, like just scale that up. Like that's 11 liters per gram of oyster per hour. That's
Whoa.
that's incredibly high. Other kinds of bivalve, so there's also a commonly studied mussel called Dukensia demissa that can clear 5 or 6 liters an hour per gram of mussel. And that kind of makes sense because a Dukensia is oysters are very variable in how big they get. A Dukensia is about half the size of a Crassostria, give or take. So it doesn't sound like a lot, although like I couldn't pump 11 liters of water at just 11 liters an hour continually my whole life. Like that would be insane. But like when bivalves are abundant in a place, all of those 11 liters, they really add up. So, like in the Delaware estuary, which the estimate I've got for its size is about 55,000 hectares, they have a lot of this mussel Dukensia. The estimation is that they are filtering about 60 billion liters an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah, it's
I,
wild.
and so if you have an ecosystem, a reef that has healthy bivalve populations, what does that look like? What does that healthy area look like?
Man, a lot of bivalves. So the nice thing about bivalves is, as well as particularly things like mussels, oysters, the epiphyseal ones that live on the surface, there's a lot of bang for buck there because they clean your water. They provide food for not only people, but also a lot of animals. They provide habitat for a lot of animals. They protect the seafloor from erosion as well. So I would say probably a healthy area like that probably has reasonably clear water with a lot of flow going on, and it would have a lot of other creatures in it as well. Not only are they cleaning the water, but they're attracting other things that want to live in this habitat that they create. So you're thinking things that predate on bivalves, but also things that just want a bit of shelter. There are a lot of creatures that need a little bit of shelter. They can't just live on a bare rock or a bare sand bottom. So I would say an ecosystem with a healthy bivalve population is probably a fairly biodiverse ecosystem.
And because the water is likely clear, I imagine there's more light penetration, which allows for healthy corals and oxygen levels and everything that just
Yeah, so
comes from that.
yeah, if we're talking strictly about their filtration, then yes, they absolutely would have probably the biggest effect on light pollution. They also affect algae growth because different kinds of algae need different levels of light. So that will start to
Mm.
control what your algal population is because they can or can't deal with different levels of light. The really nice thing also that they do is that they deplete nitrogen. So nitrogen is very important. You have to have nitrogen. It's a crucial nutrient, but too much nitrogen can then cause toxic algal blooms, and even non-toxic
Hmm.
algal blooms start to deplete your dissolved oxygen. So the algae use up
Yeah.
your oxygen and they grow on your nitrogen. So the oxygen levels will fluctuate with the nitrogen levels and the bivalves and the algae. And they're kind of complicated web kind of a system. Humans put a
And you get a lot of that runoff from agricultural areas, right?
bingo. So humans put a hell of a lot of nitrogen into the system. We love nitrogen. It makes stuff grow. Unfortunately,
Mm,
it doesn't stay where you put it, and it runs
yeah.
off into waterways and everything ends up in the ocean. All roads lead to the ocean. So, having a healthy bivalve population both in your freshwater, so in your rivers, and the US is hugely blessed with an amazing population of what we call unionid mussels, freshwater mussels, which are unique and very special. Many of them are endemic to the USA and they're in danger right now, but they are great at mitigating problems in the water. So if your farms are dumping into rivers, then your first line of defense is your freshwater bivalves. And then once you get to the ocean, the marine bivalves will take over.
Now, in areas where bivalve populations have declined, what does that ecosystem look like? What is that water quality like?
I mean, it's hugely variable, right? And so there are a lot of real world examples of population decline in bivalves, basically everywhere: UK, USA, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, all these places, particularly bivalves like oysters that live on hard ground, so they're easy to find, they live in big groups, and they're delicious and they can't run away. Unfortunately, however, we don't really have much data on what the water quality in those places used to be because it's like most of these depletions happened in the 19th century, like when mechanized methods of collecting bivalves like the oyster dredge and the hydraulic tongs, which are like a grab it, they're very nasty. So those really damaged all of the habitat, and that decline started long before we were doing things like measuring water quality. But I think we can reverse the question in that we can say that in historically overfished places where bivalve restoration has been attempted, you do see a big improvement in water quality in terms of clarity and nitrogen removal. So I think generally, as you lose your bivalves, you start to lose your biodiversity. So you have less stuff living in the water, probably more algae and just cloudy, nasty water, unfortunately.
Now, what about bivalve farms? Are they as positive as wild farms? Are they actually, let me take a step back even further. Are bivalve farms done in open water or are there facilities?
That's a great question. I believe they're mostly open water. My understanding of
Okay.
it, although I don't work a heap on commercial stuff, but my understanding of it is that people are given license to culture bivalves in a given area of the sea, much as people have like a fishing claim or on land,
Hmm.
say you might have a mining or a prospecting claim. It's okay, you can look for minerals in this chunk of land. I believe the situation with commercial bivalves is you have this area of the ocean that's in the jurisdiction of this government, you can raise bivalves there. I do know that oysters, like particularly very expensive oysters, get moved around a bunch. Like they're raised in one country's waters where they're like lots of nutrient and warm and nice, so they grow big, and then they're finished in another country. I'm unclear
Interesting.
on why, but I think that might be partly why they're so goddamn expensive. Yeah, so my understanding is that commercial bivalve culture is done in the sea. They're not on land in a big tank. I believe they're in the ocean, yeah.
Are they as positive as just wild populations?
So there is a lot of research and debate about the degree to which bivalve shellfish farms can mitigate other activities. But I think what is not in question is, yeah, if you add more bivalves, you're going to get cleaner water. Like that's because
Hmm.
they're eating everything that's coming through the water. They can't not clean the water. So I think most of the debate is around things like if I have a finfish farm, which produce a lot of nitrogen, if I put a bivalve farm next to it, do I get net zero nitrogen dump? Like, does it offset?
Hmm.
And there is a lot of debate over whether or not that's true. But what I think is not particularly up for debate is the fact that, yeah, if you add bivalves to the ecosystem, you're going to get cleaner water. That's just how that goes. They yeah, I think it would be fair to say that additional bivalves generally have a positive impact. Although before someone writes into you really angrily, I will say there are invasive bivalves in some places, and while yes, they do
Oh,
have an incredibly good effect on the water, such as you may have heard of the zebra mussel Dreissena, which has
yeah.
a bad effect. It's freshwater, but they have a bad effect on your local freshwater mussels, but they do clean the water. Like, they're doing bad other things. I'm not saying we should support the zebra mussel. We should remove the zebra mussel from places that it's invasive, but it is cleaning the water. Like,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And again, because they're filtering all of the pollutants and the toxic stuff, you don't necessarily want to eat all that you find.
No. So first rule, you should absolutely 100% never ever collect and eat shellfish from a place where there has been any kind of heavy metal outfall, and you often get that near sewage outfall. So if you know where there is a sewage outfall, do not collect shellfish from around that. The shellfish will tempt you. They will be big and they will look great because they have been eating lots of very nutritious things. Because sewage, unfortunately for us, sewage, which has a terrible origin, once it breaks all the way down, it's just a bunch of nutrient. I hate to say it, but it really is. So they'll look great, but with all of that nutrient, they are getting heavy metals, and heavy metals accumulate in the soft tissue and in the shell, and they go up the food chain. Likewise, if they have been filtering water with fecal matter in it, that can carry pathogens, and that will also probably make you sick. You should not do that. Anywhere near a human sewage outfall, no, don't touch. However, as I said earlier, bivalves caught and sold live for the food trade by people who know what they're doing have often been through a process where they're kept live in very clean water for a certain amount of time so that anything that's in their gut just passes through and leaves, and then they're okay. So that will definitely help with things like bacterial load, fecal matter. It will not help with heavy metals. But I would strongly doubt that any decent aquaculturist who's selling to supermarkets is not growing their bivalves near a heavy metal outfall. So I'm not trying to like cause a panic. If you are purchasing shellfish, they are within the bounds of statistics. You're gonna be fine. They're very good for you to eat.
Now, what about microplastics? Because they're everywhere.
Yep. Yeah. If it's a small enough piece of plastic to be in the sediment load, then yes, they're ingesting it. So there are some immediately good consequences of that because the bivalve knows that plastic is not food. So it doesn't eat it. It will roll it up into pseudofeces and dump it over the side. And the effect of that is it's effectively taking all these floaty bits of plastic, gluing them together and dumping them. And what that's doing is taking them out of the water column. So it's taking them away from anybody else who's filter feeding and might be less discriminate and then eat them. So that's a good thing.
Does that what did you call it? Pseudofecal? Pseudofeces, is that basically becoming sand?
Yes.
Like it lands on the seafloor?
Effectively, yeah. Instead of having the particles in the water column, it dumps them into the ground. That does now mean, however, that those plastics are available to things that eat dirt, which is a surprisingly large number of things. Or I shouldn't say eat dirt, the deposit feeders, things that are hunting with little greebly tentacles across the surface of the seafloor for food that may or may not be as discriminate as a bivalve, so they can pick them up there. Generally, what a bivalve is doing is making it less easy for another organism to eat that microplastic unless they're an organism that's tromping through dirt. However, because the microplastics are not eaten by the bivalves, they don't seem to affect it too much, although this is a very new area of study and bivalves are not a heavily studied group of organisms. I've only heard of one lab working on this, so maybe we'll find out in 10 years' time that it's all had a horrible effect. One thing I will say is that microplastics are known to carry other pollutants on their surface, so that the plastic itself is bad, but they can also be coated in nasty stuff, other kinds of toxins, which what we don't know is whether or not those are resident inside the bivalve long enough for those toxins to affect it. And we also don't know if having dumped the stuff over the side as pseudofeces, if they're then leaching those toxins into the sediment. But in terms of the effect on the water quality, bivalves will remove microplastics from the water.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now let's do a slight pivot from cleaning the ocean, because I have some other questions regarding bivalves. So for you directly, you work with museum collections of bivalves. What can the ancient ones tell us? Are they any different than the ones today?
So, bivalves have been around 500 million years. They've been around a very long time.
Mm.
And they are possibly, aside from like plankton, they are probably the thing in the world that fossilizes the most often. So, okay, so there are more species of snail than anything else but insect. And because snails fossilize a hell of a lot better than insects, there are more
Mm.
fossils of snails. However, bivalves fossilize better than snails. So even though there are more species of snails, there are more individuals of fossil bivalves basically than anything else. So what that gives you is an amazing power because bivalves, their shell, which is the bit that preserves, is their whole tool for interacting with the world. It's their shovel, it's their protection, it's everything that they have almost. And so the shape of it is incredibly functional, right? You can understand things about how a bivalve lives from the shape of its shell from certain measurements you can take. The other thing you can do is they grow by accretion. So they start small and they add to their shell.
Mm.
So every bivalve preserves a record of how it looked all the way through its growth and history. So with these three things combined, this long record, these many specimens preserved, and this incredibly interpretable morphology, you can use bivalves to understand things like what were the consequences of climate change in the past, because
Oh.
we can measure from rocks and other things what the temperature was, and then you can go and so we have we have a climate curve. So there's like the Zecchi-Ramo curve of climate through time. So we have that,
Hmm.
and then what we can do is we can say, okay, at this time of say in the Mesozoic, atmospheric CO2 was this, therefore we think the temperature was that, and oh look, this kind of bivalve thrived and this kind of bivalve died. So you can start to understand the consequences of things like climate change or any kind of climactic event or any kind of measurable ecological event. Oh, an ocean opened up. What did that do to the local populations? You can track. It's a very cliched phrase to say the tempo and mode of evolution, but you can track the tempo and mode of evolution using bivalves because they give you a really comprehensive data set. You can look at things like, oh, they were growing faster at this time. They were growing bigger but slower at this time. What does that mean about life history? What does that mean about how species form?
You mentioned Chesapeake Bay earlier, and I actually don't live far
Oh,
from
cool.
from Chesapeake Bay. So I wanted to ask you this before when you brought it up. In Chesapeake Bay, the blue crab
Mhm.
is a prized food item, and it has been affected by this deadly parasite.
Mm.
And I read somewhere that scientists have found that oysters are actually able to remove this parasite. So having oysters and these bivalves, they're helping
Yeah.
this other food source that we find so valuable in this part of the world. Are there other examples where bivalves are, quietly protect or support species that people care about?
I mean, lots of things eat bivalves. Walruses eat bivalves, and people love walrus. Walrus are so
Hmm.
charismatic, and they eat exclusively, as far as I'm aware, very small bivalves. If you ever see
Huh.
not an oyster, sorry, a walrus's skull, its mandible and maxilla have a little divot in them that's the exact right size for a clam, about 3 centimeters long. And what they do, I had this from a walrus scientist who I know. She told me that the walrus uses its whiskers, which are very mobile, to pick up the clam and just bring them up to its face, and then it sucks the clam meat out and just spits the shells out whole. So things like that, like there are a lot of charismatic animals that we love that are bivalve consumers. As well as that, there are many beautiful reef fish that have to lay their eggs amongst like bivalves and on reefs. There are lots of reef creatures that, to be honest, are probably not that fussy about the exact nature of the animals that make up the reef, but they love the shelter that they give, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, bivalves make hard substrate where perhaps there was no hard substrate before, which is
Mm.
incredibly valuable to things. So, and there are bivalves, giant clams live alongside corals. And in fact, they're both, so giant clams can filter feed a little bit, but they mostly are symbiotic with this thing called Symbiodinium, which is a dinoflagellate alga, and that gets life and it makes food. That's the exact same symbiont that the corals use. They're both using
Oh,
Symbiodinium.
okay.
Yeah, it's fun. Those kinds of links are not always well studied. So coming up with a
Mhm.
load of specific examples is sometimes tricky, but I think biodiversity supports biodiversity. If you
Yeah.
have habitat and food, you will get animals, and animals bring other animals, and they bring plants as well. And bivalves produce you both food and habitat. So
Yeah.
they're
Very
ecosystem
nice.
engineers. That's the fancy term.
Now, I heard a neat little piece of trivia then, and tell me if this is true, that oyster larvae listen for reefs for where to settle down.
I don't know about listen. I don't think they have hearing,
No, I
but
know, but
but
it was like listen in quotes.
they may be chemosensing. So I don't know exactly. I do know that some kinds of oyster can pick where they settle, and if they settle somewhere that they don't like, they have a narrow window of time in which they can refloat themselves and get back up into the water column and find somewhere else. And so I believe that's probably chemosensing. They're probably chemosensing other oysters because that's where they
Okay.
want to be, is with their fellows. So I suspect that's what's going on. They don't just randomly settle, as far as I'm aware. They do have some method of finding where to go. But yeah, I
Mhm.
suspect it would be more analogous to our smell rather than hearing.
All right. Last question. I've heard of oyster shell recycling programs that could be useful for restoration. Is that the case? Like, how does that work?
So oysters need hard substrate. Well, they don't. Most modern oysters need hard substrate. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions. This is biology. But
Mhm.
generally, an oyster will prefer to settle on a hard ground. And because it likes to settle on other or near other oysters, as we discussed, providing a bed of recycled dead oyster shell will be attractive to the oyster larva more than
Mm.
bare sand. So I suspect that's what that is.
Katie, this was super interesting. Thank you for all that knowledge. And it's was really good to learn more about bivalves and also what to know that you can't just necessarily go pick them up and eat them.
Yeah.
They might not be that good for you. But again, thank you so much for joining me. This was super interesting today.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun. I always like an opportunity to talk about bivalves.
Thanks for listening to the Healthy Seas podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, follow and share it with others who care about the ocean. Want to dive deeper? Subscribe to our newsletter at healthyseas.org/newsletter for behind-the-scenes stories, upcoming projects, and partner updates from around the world. There are many ways to be part of the mission. Donate, partner, spread the word, or simply stay connected. Explore how at healthyseas.org/take-action. Together, we can turn marine waste into waves of change.